Hello everyone. 2024 was a fabulous year at Vävstuga. We've done a lot of weaving here, as you can see on the back shelf here, and more things that you can't see. And I'm so eager to share all of these things with you, starting here at the table. Åsa Viksteinströmbom joined us last year for a class, and it was fabulous. We focused on this technique here, the bound plattväv, and we have her book that's been translated by me a few years back. It's a fascinating technique with plain weave, weft face plain weave on the front, and the floats are on the back. So it's a one-sided but very solid and dense and sturdy on this one side. Beautiful color arrangements with the blocks. Here's a little piece even woven in rags, the same technique. Fascinating technique. It's thick and very sturdy weft face plain weave blocks on the front side. She also did a raya sampler for people, and that was so much fun. And she's coming back this year to focus more on raya, which will be wonderful. So check that out. We're also eager to welcome Monica Helaine back. And this year I finally got around to weaving her sampler for the Rag Rug Techniques class. So starting there at the bottom, she takes you through so many different interesting techniques using rags. And so I've got a little sampler here. And if you haven't taken that already, it's so much fun. Here's some little inlaid poofy things, other kinds of inlay, and these little chevron bands. And so that is a very fun class for you to check out. I also wove off the ends of a few warps from Monica's class. And here you see a goose eye, and I experimented because I did the goose eye here with the white bands, and here I did it with the dark bands because I was kind of curious how that would compare. So this one was not from Monica's class, but it was woven around the same time while I had the rags out. This is a monk's belt rag rug from our beloved Palmgren book that you'll be hearing more about during this video. Now we have a lot of bands on the table, and the exciting news about bands is last year I did publish my band weaving class on Vimeo, learning how to weave all kinds of bands on a rigid heddle, on the Vävstuga band loom, and also on floor looms. And sometimes the same band could be woven on all of those pieces of equipment. And I have these in no particular order. We'll just go through them one by one. And I've finished a lot of bands. Some of these were started a long time ago, but I had to finish a lot this year. This one here is a very special band in the Mora tradition. And you do get to see a demonstration of me weaving this band on the Mora band loom in my video. But you'll also get to see Barbara Helaine teaching me how to do Mora bands in the way that she's learned the tradition over there. So that's a very exciting piece. And this has been on a rigid heddle forever, but I finally finished it, including all these little fringes. And this is a Lexand band with an alphabet here and very fine sewing thread and 16-2 cotton, and it just keeps going. I tried to weave a picture of the house. I don't know how successful that was. There it says Vävstuga and a date and some other stuff. This next one, this is my band. I demonstrate the classic pickup technique on the Vävstuga band loom. You can do these pickup patterns so easily on that equipment. And this one is a plain weave band in the video that I designed with no cross. I didn't really even make a warp. I just did it one thread at a time. You can just see how I did that in the video. It's just with a wad of random threads. And here are two. And in part two, because, oh, look, different fringes. We got a twisty one and a braided one. This is a 6-shaft band on a floor loom. Very quick to weave, which is kind of why you see two of them. And this is a pattern I collected in Sweden back in 1981 that I finally wove with, I believe, 11 pattern threads. This one is also in the video. the band weaving video on our Vimeo channel, and a plain weave one. Again, it's been on the loom for a long time, but I finished it. This is band number 1 in the video class on the Vävstuga band loom. In the Mora wool, it makes a really nice silky plain weave band. And here is another version of that 6-shaft floor loom band. And this little delicate one, linen lace yarn, and like a fine wool for the pattern. And that's just a very delicate, lovely 7-pattern thread design. And this is one that's also in the video, but we also do it in our band fest on a floor loom, a traditional Sami band pattern, but done probably in unconventional way. And this one's fun because the patterns keep changing. And so there's just 7 pattern threads, but they keep changing. And that's out of one of our newer Norwegian band books that we have currently in the store. And this little chevron. This is a great kind of pattern to start with, either on the rigid heddle or the band loom. I've done that pattern both ways. And here is our starter Mora band. It's a hair band, so something that would have been worn as you tie up your braids onto your head, but it gives you the rudimentary skills of tying up the pattern savers for the Mora band. This was done on the Vävstuga band loom and is part of the class. This one is also part of the video class on a regular rigid heddle, and this is a different kind of pickup style. I call it the simple pattern pickup, and it just is alternating orange and black threads, but you can do these nice pickup designs just with that simple setup. And here is one, again, I've had on a rigid heddle for a long time. I finally finished it. It's done on one of the larger pattern slot heddles, and a very, very easy pickup because here you have floats on the edges and then floats in the middle, floats on the edges and in the middle. So it's very easy pickup. Pick up those and then pick up these. But the background threads make a bunch of the pattern happen. And this one was just a pretty cool pattern I saw in a book, and the pattern threads were black, so it's a little unusual. And this one is the very first rigid heddle plain weave band that I present in the video class, and this is what's going to come with the kit. So if you buy the kit for the band weaving class, you will get everything you need to make this band right here. So this one here is a leftover bit of warp from one of my students last summer at the band fest class, as is this one. And this also is from the band fest class. So if you're excited about some of these bands, do check out our band weaving class and our Vimeo channel. Now we come to rep weave, and this has been a very exciting year for rep weave as well as for bands, because I am working currently on the rep weave video class on Vimeo. It will probably take the rest of the year, but we've got a great start, and these are some of the projects that are going to be in the class, as well as a tremendous number of others that you get to see in the class. But these are the ones we can look at right now. Starting with, let's look here at our string yarn. This is our Garnhuset Mini Bum string yarn that we recently brought into the store. It comes in beautiful colors. So that really expands our opportunities for the weft color, which really just shows at the edge, but it's nice to have a good selection. So let's start here at the beginning. This little runner is the very beginning. Very simple rep, just 2 treadles, and could even be done with 2 shafts. It's just plain weave with a chunky weft. It's like a big wide band, like those plain weave bands we just saw. So that's the very beginning of a very simple rep. And then we go on to a simple block weave. And so I will show you in the video how to wind this warp and beam it, which is a little bit different. You sometimes want to beam it a little bit wider on your back beam so you have room, because the threads are so dense. And so we have some placemats, and we have a nice runner. And so that was a fun project. This one here is an intriguing set of samples of lots of different variations, including a bit of freeform weaving, which is really intriguing to do. And I also, at the end of the warp, wove this nice little hot pad using broomcorn as the weft that we grew in our own garden. And then we move on to this nice set of placemats here, which is something that I wove a long time ago and sold in my booth when I did production weaving. But I thought it'd be fun to revisit that. It's a very basic 4 blocks, but 2 pairs of opposite blocks. So 4 treadles, 4 shafts. And this one was not done for the video, but this was a little bit of a warp left over from our immersion class last summer, and Tanya was kind enough to weave off a bit of it for us to have as a sample here to look at. And it is in fact the same threading as this big diamond here, these little diamonds. There's so many different ways you can weave this same pattern. So that's a lot of fun. And that brings us to this rug. And so for the rug, you're going to put 4 of those mini bloom string yarns together to make a chunky enough weft. This is 16-2 cotton in the warp, and it's the same technique that we saw in the purple placemats, but this time we have a nice border arrangement. And this rug is in our friend the Palmgren book, and so it's going to be in the video, but it's also part of our Palmgren project. Just a beautiful, beautiful classic design. Then we have another set of placemats and a runner this time to go with it too. You can see the one side and the other side. They're both great. This is a 6 shaft pattern, 3 blocks. And so with the 3 blocks, you get a 2 block pattern here, and then your 3rd block gets to do something else over there. Again, a nice border treatment, classical design from one of my favorite old books, different one from the Palmgren book. And now here is one of my favorite rugs from that Palmgren book. A very interesting design, unusual. Again, 16-2 cotton. And this time is 8 shafts and 8 treadles, but the treadle arrangement is very interesting. And the tie-up, I used 2 counterbalance beams, 2 sets of 4 shaft counterbalance tie-ups right next to each other. And so this will all be explained in detail in our upcoming video, hopefully later this year. Some of you will recognize this one. We sell this currently as a warp to go on our website. It's called the Planet Rep. This is a rug. You could get it in a placemat version or a skinny runner. So many different colorways. And so this is a really beautiful classic pattern. And so in the upcoming video, I do talk a lot about different ways to design, including adding colors to a block pattern like this. And I am including in the class our classic dragonfly pattern that I made up a long time ago when I was sitting in a craft fair booth waiting for people to buy my stuff. And so this is a 10 shaft pattern, 5 blocks, 10 shafts, 10 treadles, and look for this sometime coming up this year as a warp to go. These are just so much fun. And last but not least, in our rep department, this intriguing bath mat. Could use either side. I kind of think of this as the right side, but this is a combination of open rep, of sparse and dense really. So here's the dense, you see warp threads, and here is sparse, you see more of the weft. So this is one of the times where you actually see a little bit of the weft in the rep. So that just adds to your design possibilities enormously. So there's a piece a little bit later on that I will show you that is a special kind of overshot. But I did my square piece of that, and I needed to use up the warp, and I just thought, well, let's do something a little different. And I did a tiny bit of patterning here with the overshot treadles, but it's mostly plain weave. And so that will be a nice little summer shirt at some point. Something that we did a lot of here in 2024 was fabric. So 3 different kinds of fabric classes. We had a pomegranate party, we had a book nook class, and then we had a pomegranate upholstery party. So I've kind of brought those all together, and we're going to go through them. And you can see here all these bolts of different fabrics. And we've got some other ones laid out. And so we're just going to go through them one at a time and take a peek. Jenna did some sewing for us in our book nook class. So here is a bag that she made really as a model. These are fabrics I made longer ago, but the band was part of my actually band video class that's online right now. But great little bag with pockets inside. So we made fabrics, but we also showed people how to use the fabrics for stuff. And let's look at this next. This was from the pomegranate book. It was an upholstery fabric, and that was woven in gray. It was really an interesting structure. I wove some with gold. And then at the very end of the warp, does this ever happen to you? I did something different, and I really liked that the best, a little plaid kind of a thing. And so that was a really fun exploration into the pomegranate book. Another bit of upholstery from the pomegranate book. Very interesting, because this is a weft-faced plain weave here. The black stripe is going over a bunch of warp threads and under a bunch, and then that's the opposite shed, so it's kind of this scallopy black stripe. And here we have a 3-1 weft effect twill. And so combining those 3 structures in one piece. And this is 16-1 linen, so it's got that great linen-y feel to it. Where do we go next? Let's go here. This is Drell from the pomegranate book. And there were 4 different ways to weave on this one warp, set up the same way. We have kind of the pointed twill effect here, and we have little black diamonds there, and little green crosses, and then little orange donuts, or whatever you want to call them. And down here on this one, again, the very end of the warp, I decided, oh, let's play around with some colors and different proportions. And I really did enjoy how that one came out. And then we have this whole pile. Some double weave out of the pomegranate book. And this was 8-2 cotton, warp and weft, same colors. Here the weft was orange instead of white, and it was purple instead of the red. So that was interesting. 16-1 linen weft here. And then a thinner cotton weft here, all white cotton. So woven 3 different ways. And then this was some sort of seersuckery thing that was a bit of leftover warp we wove. And that was a bit of leftover warp from something you'll see in a moment on a big roll. And this is a bit of leftover warp from our classics class, actually, tow linen, 6 tow linen. But just using random stuff up can make a really nice little top or something. And then this, I made quite a bit of fabric, just a very simple fabric, but it was on the same warp as this from our book nook, which was set up on a very primitive type of draw loom on the Lilla, which is a piece of equipment under development here. And here you can write Vävstuga on the binding, for example. So a book cover was the idea, but it also made a nice fabric. And this was another fabric from our book nook class, and another one. This one I did a long time ago, and it was so much fun I decided to repeat it. And also this was from the book nook class, but we made pillow covers. A lot of people did pillow covers out of that. And this was from the pomegranate party. This was a curtain. Let's open this up. So this is a curtain with a monk's belt inlay, and you actually weave it upside down to do the inlay. But it makes just a lovely curtain when you hang it up in the window. And this one, we saw a snippet woven, just a fabric, plain weave fabric from the end of this warp. This was part of our pomegranate party. This is called Oslevev. So it's named after a place in Sweden. And it's just an intriguing pattern. This particular project, I think it got rethreaded about 3 times to figure out how to adjust from the original 32 cotton to this 33-2 cotton, which is our new finer cotton we're very excited about. And it made a lovely a lovely piece here. And so here, instead of the pattern being kind of in the center, it's the plain weave in the center. So that's something a little different about this particular pattern. Here, it's the plain weave doing that center motif. And this was a piece that was just made recently from our Palmgren Upholstery Week, just last December. And all of these upholsteries were so very different materials in the warp and the weft, different structures. This was actually a rose path threading, but just using 2 of the rose path pattern treadles and cotton warp and a wool weft. And here we saw that double weave before, but here's a bigger bolt of more of the one where I just had one shuttle because that was nice and fast to weave, but I also think it looks very nice. A little bit of leftover linen warp woven into some just plain stripy fabric. Why not do that? Again, from the upholstery class, we can take a look at this one. Could be a pillow cover, a very intriguing structure that I had never seen before. It's a little bit like Drell, but not quite. It uses our 6-2 blanket yarn for the weft-faced plain weave areas, and it uses the raya here for the pattern floats. And this one is perhaps a little subtle to see. It's similar colors here to what's in the Palmgren book, but then I ended up weaving it with black, and I changed the pattern a little bit. This is just a basic 8-shaft twill variation in 16-2 cotton, both warp and weft. And now we come to one of my favorites. This has always intrigued me in the Palmgren book, this upholstery. And here is just a different set. This is the same warp, same materials, 16-2 cotton doubled actually in the warp, an orange and yellow thread together. And so the tighter one is a little bit sturdier fabric, and this isn't a looser set. I think it works well both ways. But then I ended up weaving a bunch of this. But by the end of the warp, you know what happens at the end of the warp? You start to, when you get there, you start to get itchy to play around with other colors. And so we can look at some of these. There's a yellowy one. That's a little bit with some gray and some white in there and sort of a plain thing. But then I liked how that came out. And I actually really like this red one at the very end, but I really did run out of warp, right? When you get excited about doing stuff is when your warp runs out. Ooh, and this one is one of our favorites from the Palmgren book. Something that you might not think to do very often, but it's fabulous. It's just a 5-shaft satin with a stripe in the warp. Very dense. It's 16-2 cotton, but it's got such a sheen and such a silky feel to it. Satin weave is truly an amazing weave. And I just think this is a beautiful piece of fabric. Imagine a big sofa all done up in that. And we just got 3 more of these bolts left and a few books to look at in this section. But this is some fabric that I made a long time ago that I really thought was successful and nice. And I needed a little bit more of it. So we did this in a class. And then again at the end, I played around a little bit. There's so many possibilities with this kind of a warp. This is one last bolt of fabric from our Palmgren party last spring. It's an 8-shaft twill, and you can see both sides look really interesting. It's got that nice wiggly shape to it. This is in cotton, so it would make really nice fabric for clothing. And just one little look here before we take a peek at our last bolt of fabric. These nice book covers done in fabrics, bound Platvev book. You could put in a little bookmark. And so these book covers are just a lot of fun in various upholstery fabrics. And that brings us to our last bolt of fabric here, which will segue us to the next class. Last summer we had a very special class called Dwell on Drell, and I wove this with some of the leftover warp And then I went on to do other variations. And so this again could be some sort of garment, and all of these fabrics will be compatible together somehow. Little bits could be pocket trim, and then here's sort of a plain section. So we'll see what that will turn into. But I'll show you next the original piece from this warp. So next we have a pile of goodies from our Dwell on Drell class last summer, including a few other goodies that I left out of the previous tableful, but we'll just take a look at all of it. So next we have a pile of goodies from our Dwell on Drell class last summer, including a few other goodies that I left out of the previous tableful, but we'll just take a look at all of it. Starting with this piece here, Kukola Drell, a special Drell that has been designed by a Finnish weaver earlier last century, but it gained some popularity. So these Drells, you can just make up your own. They tend to be block weaves, but not always. It's a little bit of a mysterious word, but that's why we had our class Dwell on Drell. So we have lots of different Drells. This is sort of like Jämtland's Drell here, but it's got a bigger float area there with these polka dots. So it's a little special. And then we have this intriguing little piece, Sjusprångs Drell, 7-jump Drell. A bit of an unusual structure, but you can see the detailed look of it. It's very fine, and here's a little different colorway. You can see the back side a little bit. It's got these floats. And then this is Jämtland's Drell. Beautiful as a square, but also as a nice long runner. So Jämtland is a place in Sweden, kind of like a geographical area. Oftentimes these Drells are named after a place, either a town or a whole area. And it happened a long time ago, so who knows if this technique really is from there, but at least it got named after the place. We don't really know. And then Dal-Drell. Probably a lot of you are familiar with that. Dal means a valley, and Dalarna is a province or an area, geographical area in Sweden, meaning the valleys. I like to translate it as valley block weave is really their name for overshot. And this kind of pattern here is a very typical use of Dal-Drell or overshot in Sweden. A little less frequent that you see that in this country with these long bars. Well, we've got overshot out. I'm going to pull out this piece here that I forgot to show you earlier. This is also overshot. This was from our Palm Grand Party class. So Eva wove one of these. We have two of them woven a little bit differently just to try it out. In the class, some people also did a little runner because that works out too. And so linen overshot, quintessential Swedish thing to do. This is a Drell from the Palmgren book. If you just use the word Drell by itself, it means this kind of block damask. 2 blocks. And this one is just 8 shafts, so it's just 2 blocks of a 3-1 broken twill in pretty fine yarn, cotton, warp, linen weft. And then moving down the pile of Drells, we have Drop Drell, which some of you might call spot weave. It's in the lace weave family, but I think it's a really beautiful design from Tina Ingnell's book with plain weave stripes here and then the little lace there. So it makes a lovely curtain and you hang it up in the window. And this is a very intriguing Dal-Drell or overshot. I showed you a bit of fabric earlier that I wove on the rest of this warp. But here, if you look close, you can see there are floats next to clean plain weave squares. Usually with overshot, next to the float, you get a half tone. So this is using the blocks on opposites is one way to say it. And then you get lots of the half tone area in here. So it's a really different look to this kind of overshot. And then we have these. These were so much fun. These were halvdrell. And I wove 4 different variations. This was weaving just the same yarn as the warp. So it's very subtle. These are all with the 33-2 Cotylene, or fine Cotylene, which we're so excited about. Here I doubled the Cotylene, 2 shades of gold together for the pattern weft. Here is just a single gold for the pattern weft. It worked really well, all of these different ways. A nice 4-shaft structure that you can find in my drafting book, Weave Structures the Swedish Way. So these are sole Drell, which you may know as M's and O's. Same warp here. There's 2 different ways of weaving it. And this feature of the special little wiggly line, a little outline. This is from an old Swedish book, and I think it's a lovely use of the structure. And this was not part of the Dwell on Drell class, but I meant to pull it out earlier and didn't, so we'll look at it now. It is just Göta Drell. It is a Drell. Which side do we want to look at? Maybe that one. This was interesting. This was from the Palmgren Party class in the spring. I expected the wool to shrink more than the warp. And I was surprised that when I washed it, the cotton warp shrank a little more. So see how these are kind of squatty. So I wove it again, making these more elongated on the warp. So these were longer rectangles on the warp, but it washed down to square. So that was an interesting thing to learn on this. And then just weaving it in cotton instead of the wool made a really nice table runner. Kind of excited about that. Same warp as the one we just saw. So we had a fun class last summer called Gamp Camp. And we're running the class again this year, but I've redesigned it a bit to include more weave structures and even a set gamp and different kinds of gamps other than just the colors. But let's take a look at what we did last year. These are just a little tiny selection of our array of 6-2 blanket wool. So many colors, so luscious. And to see how they all blend together was really pretty wonderful. And then this was the 22 wool, or nice fine wool. We also have the 28-2 wool now, which is even finer. But this is just a luscious combination of going from blues to greens to yellows. So it's the whole rainbow. But on some of these others, we had different ideas. So this one here in the Cotylene, I just went from greens to blues because there are so many greens and blues. So to see how all of those combine was really a great thing to experiment with. And here's the Möbelota. We just used most of the colors. And so here we have a little pastel corner, and then here's a fun little corner of blues and greens, and a lot of reds, because there's so many reds in this yarn. So to see how those combine is great. Of course, the yellow really stands out. And then here are some of the other blues and greens on this end. This one is the 35-2 lace linen. So how often do we ever get to weave with that? It was beautiful to weave with in the plain weave. I love all the neutrals here, and then it goes through the reds and the pinks and some of the greens and blues. And so this is the whole color palette of the 35-2 linen. So if you want to even weave one of these at home, let us know. And this was a fun study on neutrals. So we just took all the neutrals, starting with the bleached. This is the 16-2 linen. And so you have the bleached and the half bleached and the golden bleached and the unbleached. And then some of these lighter gold colors. You can see the solid colors on the diagonal, all these browns and the blacks, and then going into grays and how they all combine. So that was a fun just color study in those neutral colors. And what else have we got here? So these two go together. This is our 8-2 cotton. And here we did a plain weave one. And here we did the same one in twill. And the colors just behave so differently in the different structures that's really wonderful to see. And also it feels different. This feels thicker, and this is a little thinner, maybe a little stiffer. This is more wiggly. So just interesting to experiment with all of this. So we just saw the 8-2 cotton. This is the 16-2 cotton, both in the plain weave and the twill, but in all pastel colors. So we can see how those combine. And this is our 33-2 cotton, that fine cotton that's recently added to our selection in the store, plain weave and twill, and just a selection of sort of reddy, rosy things to yellows and to pinks, because there's so many different color shades within a family. So there's so many ways to put these Gamps together, as well as seeing how the colors all blend with each other. And we usually have a few leftover warps from our Vev Immersion class, and I always do get some of the tablecloths that they wove. So let's take a look at these. Let's start with this. This is our 28-2 wool. We had a couple of immersion students this last summer put on this amazing yardage in the 28-2 wool, and it's just lovely. It's thin and drapey and delicate and soft. So just a beautiful yardage out of that. And then Lisa Hill's towels are always a real hit. And so we had this color choice last year. We've made 2 of them. So here's the deflected double weave towel with the same colors as the warp. Of course, we have our little hangy tab. And then we decided to do another one with sort of softer, more pastel colors to tone it down a little bit. And so Eva wove these for me, which was wonderful. And there'll be something to show the next immersion class coming in to inspire them to pick their colors. But they picked their own colors for these tablecloths. And these are always a big hit. So look at these beautiful tablecloths from last year's group of students. We'll just pull these 4 out and let you have a look. They're all freshly washed and laundered, brand spanking new. And these are the kind of things that just get better over time. Look at how different all these patterns are. Oh, and this one's got lots of colors. So fun. Thank you so much for joining us to look at all of these textiles. I hope you had as much fun watching as we all did making them.